The transport ship moved quietly through the black sea of space, its metal frame humming with the sound of engines. Inside, recruits from across the galaxy sat in rows. Some were tall and armored in scales. Others clicked their mandibles and hissed in alien tongues, and a few shimmered like living crystals. They were the finest warriors of their worlds, chosen to train for the Interstellar Defense Alliance. In the middle of them sat a single human soldier, Captain Elias Ward. Elias looked ordinary compared to the others. He had no claws, no natural armor, no glowing skin. His body was lean but small when placed next to giants who carried the strength of mountains in their limbs. His skin was soft and pale, and he wore only the simple uniform issued by the Alliance. Around him, alien eyes stared, some filled with amusement, others with disbelief. "Is this a mistake?" a reptilian recruit muttered, his scales gleaming under the lights. "That soft creature cannot be one of us," several others laughed. A towering insectoid clattered its mandibles. "He is no soldier. He looks like prey." The voices carried through the transport, but Elias did not respond. He sat with his hands folded, eyes steady, his breath calm. He had known this reaction would come. Humanity was new to the galactic stage. Earth had only recently joined the Alliance, and many races had questioned what such a fragile species could contribute. But Elias had volunteered not to prove his worth to them, but to prove his worth to himself, and to show that humans, small as they were, belonged among the stars. The transport landed with a shudder on the training grounds of Helion 3, a rocky moon chosen for its harsh conditions. As the recruits filed out, the vast camp stretched before them. Tall watchtowers scanned the horizon. The ground was rough, covered in dust and stone. A sky of swirling clouds loomed overhead, lit by the pale glow of a nearby planet. The recruits assembled before their instructors, towering veterans from different worlds, their bodies marked with scars and medals. A crystalline commander stepped forward, his voice resonating like broken glass. "You are here to become soldiers of the Interstellar Defense Alliance. You are the best your worlds have to offer. You will endure trials, combat, and hardships beyond your imagination. Those who fail will return in shame. Those who succeed will defend civilization itself." The recruits stood proud. Some flexed their muscles, others hissed in confidence. Elias simply straightened his back and kept his eyes forward. When the instructors dismissed them, the recruits were taken to their quarters. The housing was a series of steel barracks, each crowded with beds. Elias entered one filled with reptilians and insectoids. The laughter began again as soon as he set down his bag. "Careful," one reptilian hissed. "Don't touch him. He might break." "He will be gone after the first trial," another said. "We should enjoy the comedy while it lasts." Elias ignored them. He sat quietly, checking his equipment, adjusting the straps on his boots, making sure everything was ready. Their words stung, but he had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the strongest reply. He did not need to convince them with arguments. He would let time speak for him. That night, as the recruits settled in, Elias lay awake staring at the metal ceiling. He thought of Earth, of the blue sky and green fields he had left behind. He thought of his family, his friends, and the doubts that had followed him even before the aliens' laughter. He knew humans were fragile compared to the giants of the galaxy. But fragility did not mean weakness. He whispered to himself in the silence. "Courage is not in the body. It's in the heart." The next day, training began. The recruits were led to the proving grounds outside the camp. Dust storms whipped across the barren land. The instructors announced their first trial, survival in the wastelands. No weapons, no support, no shelters, only their own skills and what they could build. The aliens roared with excitement, many confident in their natural abilities. They looked at Elias and smirked, certain that he would fail before the first night. When the signal was given, the recruits spread out into the wasteland. The reptilians moved with speed, their scales shielding them from the cutting wind. The insectoids skittered over rocks, their claws tearing into the ground. The crystalline beings used their bodies to refract light, walking with pride as if the land itself bent to their will. Elias walked alone. The dust stung his eyes and the wind bit at his skin. He moved carefully, studying the land, searching for resources. He found wreckage from old training modules, scraps of metal and fragments of plastic. Piece by piece, he collected them. Where the others relied on natural strength, he relied on thought, on problem-solving. He built a shelter from metal scraps angled against the wind. He found a stream of poisoned water and used fabric and heated stones to filter it, making it drinkable. His hands bled from the effort, but he continued. At night, the temperature dropped sharply. The reptilians shivered, unused to cold. The insectoids huddled together, their armor stiffening. Elias sat inside his small shelter, fire glowing from carefully arranged rocks and fuel he had scavenged. He ate rationed supplies and warmed his hands, thinking of the days to come. In the following mornings, the recruits returned, exhausted. Some had bruises, others had wounds from the sharp rocks and storms. Many looked at Elias in disbelief when they saw he was still standing, his eyes calm, his uniform dirty but intact. The laughter grew quieter. They still mocked him, but there was hesitation now. The weak creature had survived the first nights when others had nearly failed. He had done it not with strength, not with natural armor, but with a mind that adapted and a will that refused to quit. When the instructors gathered them again, the crystalline commander surveyed the group. His eyes paused on Elias, and though no words were spoken, there was a glimmer of recognition. Elias said nothing. He simply stood straight, shoulders squared, ready for whatever came next. He knew the trials would grow harder, the challenges more brutal. But he also knew this. The others could laugh as much as they wanted. Courage needed no audience. It only needed a moment to be tested. That night, as silence filled the barracks, no one laughed. Some glanced at the human with curiosity, others with unease. The smallest recruit had not broken. He had endured. And somewhere deep in their thoughts, a question formed. What if the human was stronger than he looked? Elias closed his eyes, allowing himself a faint smile. The stars outside the barracks shimmered through the thin windows, and he thought again of Earth. He was far from home, but he carried his home within him, in his courage, his endurance, and his refusal to bend before ridicule. The path ahead was long, and many trials remained. But for Elias Ward, the journey had only just begun. The days on Helion 3 grew harder. The survival trial stretched on, and each recruit was pushed to their limit. The wasteland was endless stone and dust, with poisonous winds that clawed at lungs and freezing nights that could crack the surface of metal. The stronger aliens had entered the trial full of pride, convinced their natural gifts would carry them through. But as days passed, that pride began to erode. The reptilians, though mighty, needed heat to keep their bodies moving. Their scales, once their greatest strength, worked against them in the cold. The insectoids were quick and fierce, but they struggled to find food in the barren wasteland. The crystalline beings glittered like towers of light, but they could not adapt to the storms that battered them. Each of them, in their own way, began to falter. Elias Ward, the lone human among them, worked quietly. He did not boast and he did not complain. Each day he searched for scraps of wreckage, stones, and fragments of old machines scattered in the wasteland. With patience, he built tools. He made a sharp edge from broken metal to cut cloth. He made a container from bent steel to carry water. He used his hands, his mind, and his endurance to keep moving forward. At night, while others shivered in the open air, Elias sheltered himself in his rough hut of scavenged pieces. His fire burned low, hidden from the storms, and the warmth kept his body alive. His thoughts often drifted to Earth, where fire had been the first tool of humankind, the first defense against darkness. On a dead moon far from home, he repeated the same story written by his ancestors thousands of years before. The aliens noticed. At first, they mocked him for collecting scraps instead of relying on strength. But when their own bodies grew weak, their eyes began to follow him. Some copied his methods clumsily, trying to build shelters of their own. Others waited, too proud to ask for help, yet too curious to ignore him. On the fourth day, a reptilian soldier collapsed. His massive body lay on the rocks, shivering uncontrollably. His scales could not hold heat any longer. The others hesitated, unsure what to do. They were not used to weakness, not used to seeing one of their own fall. Elias was the first to move. He pulled cloth from his shelter, wrapped it tightly around the reptilian's chest, and dragged him into cover. The reptilian groaned in shame, but Elias spoke calmly. Survival is not about pride. It is about living to see tomorrow. The others stared. A fragile human had dragged a beast twice his size, not with strength, but with determination. By the seventh day, whispers had begun. The laughter that once filled the barracks had grown quieter. The recruits still spoke of Elias, but no longer only with ridicule. Some spoke with surprise, others with doubt, and a few with reluctant respect. On the eighth day, the instructors arrived to test their progress. The crystalline commander walked among the recruits as they stood in formation. His sharp eyes studied each of them. Many bore wounds, cracked armor, or signs of exhaustion, but when his gaze fell on Elias, he saw a man standing straight, dirt-streaked but alive, his eyes steady with the same calm fire as the first day. "You have endured," the commander said. His voice echoed like ringing glass. "The wasteland does not forgive weakness, yet some of you remain standing. That is good, but survival is only the beginning. Now we will test strength and unity." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected the human to fall first, yet he had stood while others nearly broke. Now the trials would change. They would no longer be alone. They would be forced to rely on one another. The next challenge began with a march deeper into the wasteland. The recruits were ordered to form squads and carry heavy loads of supplies to an extraction point. The distance was long, the terrain rough, and the weight unbearable. The reptilians took the lead, carrying the heaviest crates on their backs. The insectoids skittered ahead, scouting the path. The crystalline beings marched with pride, their bodies glowing faintly under the storm clouds. Elias took his place quietly, carrying a smaller pack. The others sneered at first, whispering that the human was given the easiest load. But as the march continued, their sneers turned to silence. The reptilians stumbled under their own pride, their massive frames slowing them. The insectoids grew tired, their sharp legs cut by jagged rocks. The crystalline beings, though tall, cracked under the endless storm winds. Elias did not falter. His pace was steady, his breathing controlled. He carried his pack without complaint, and when others stumbled, he moved to help. He adjusted straps, lifted crates from fallen hands, and encouraged them to rise. "One step at a time," he said. "Don't think of the distance. Think of the next step." Slowly, grudgingly, the recruits began to listen. The reptilians no longer mocked when Elias helped them tie their loads with rope he had fashioned. The insectoids no longer hissed when Elias shared water he had purified. The crystalline beings no longer shined with pride when they saw the human walking without fear beside them. By the time they reached the extraction point, many of the recruits were leaning on one another. They had expected to carry the weak human, but instead it was he who carried their spirit. That night, when they returned to camp, the barracks were quiet. No laughter echoed at Elias's expense. Some glanced at him with narrowed eyes, unsure how to accept what they had seen. Others nodded slightly, a small sign of respect that was rare among warriors of proud species. Elias said nothing. He simply sat on his bunk, cleaned his boots, and prepared for the next day. He did not need their praise. He did not need their approval. All he needed was the knowledge that he had not broken, that he had endured. As the recruits drifted into uneasy sleep, the instructors watched from a distance. The crystalline commander spoke softly to his fellow officers. "The human endures longer than I expected. His body is weak, yet his will is unyielding. Perhaps there is more to his kind than we believed." The insectoid officer clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "They have no armor, no claws, no natural strength. But they do not give up. It is strange. Dangerous, perhaps," the commander nodded. "Dangerous to their enemies, perhaps. Useful to us." The officers turned away, leaving the recruits to rest. Elias lay awake once more, staring at the ceiling. He thought of the laughter that had greeted him on his first day, and how it had grown quieter. He thought of the storms, the cold, the exhaustion that had nearly broken the others but had only strengthened his resolve. He whispered again, words meant only for himself. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it." The night passed and dawn rose over the barren horizon. The trials were not yet over. Greater challenges waited beyond the wasteland. But for Elias Ward, the path was clear. He would keep moving forward step by step until the stars themselves knew the strength of the human spirit. The morning air on Helion 3 was thick with tension. The wind still cut through the barren plains, but there was a different energy now, one that carried a sense of unease. The recruits moved through the camp silently, their bodies stiff with exhaustion from the survival trials. Even the most confident among them seemed uncertain. Elias Ward felt it too, though he did not speak of it. He sensed something in the air, a shift that told him the next challenge would be unlike any before. The alarm sounded suddenly, a shrill wail echoing across the base. Recruits froze, scanning the horizon. At first, no one could see the threat. Then a flicker of movement appeared, shapes racing over the distant ridges, fast and coordinated. Raiders, marauders from a neighboring system, Notorious for raiding settlements and attacking unprepared colonies. They had come without warning, their ships hovering low, weapons bristling. The ground shook as their landing craft touched down. Dust and debris filled the air, and the alien recruits looked to one another, fear flickering in their eyes. Chaos erupted instantly. The trained soldiers tried to move into formation, but the suddenness of the attack left them disorganized. The reptilians bellowed commands to one another, yet their voices clashed and confused. The insectoids hissed angrily but did not know where to focus. The crystalline beings tried to shine their bodies to intimidate, but the marauders were not deterred. Elias did not hesitate. He grabbed a crate of supplies and moved toward the injured soldiers near the edge of the camp. The ground shook beneath the landing craft and sharp debris flew through the air. Many of the alien recruits froze in place, uncertain where to go or what to do. Elias's movements were deliberate. He lifted the wounded, carried them to safety, and shouted simple instructions that cut through the noise. "Move, cover your heads. Don't stop." The other recruits hesitated at first. They were proud warriors and pride had slowed them before, but seeing the human act without fear, seeing him guide others while dodging falling debris, something shifted. Slowly, one by one, they began to follow. The reptilians, hesitant at first, joined the formation Elias was improvising. The insectoids scuttled to positions he pointed out. Even the crystalline beings, tall and proud, took cues from the human soldier. The raiders advanced. Their ships hovered just above the ground, releasing automated drones that fired beams of energy. The camp shook with explosions as small outposts and equipment were destroyed. Elias ran across the open ground carrying a wounded insectoid in his arms. The alien hissed in surprise, then fell silent under the weight of Elias's careful grip. The human's small frame did not slow him. He had learned long ago to rely not on strength but on endurance and quick thinking. He reached a cluster of tents where the command supplies were stored. A crystalline recruit blocked the entrance, unsure whether to stay or flee. Elias pointed toward a damaged crate. "Use this for cover. Don't stay in the open." He helped maneuver the alien behind the makeshift barrier. "We move together. Watch each other." The other recruits began to mimic his actions. They formed small groups covering one another, coordinating their movements based on the human's example. Elias realized that this was no longer a simple survival trial. It was a real test of leadership. And in this test he could not falter. A raider drone swooped low, its energy beam slicing through the ground where a reptilian recruit had just been standing. Elias lunged forward, grabbing the alien and pulling him behind a boulder. Dust and sparks filled the air, and the reptilian looked at him wide-eyed. "How are you still standing?" he shouted over the noise. Elias did not answer. He simply motioned to continue moving. They crawled, ran, and dodged through the chaos, slowly gaining ground toward a safer area near the central barricades. His heart pounded, but his mind was sharp. Every decision mattered. Where to move, who to help, which drone to distract. His small size allowed him to slip through tight spaces that others could not. As they reached the barricades, Elias quickly scanned the situation. A group of young recruits was trapped near a supply depot surrounded by drones. He turned to the nearest reptilian. "Cover me. Keep the drones busy." Without waiting for debate, he dashed toward the trapped soldiers weaving between laser fire. His timing was precise, his movements calculated. He lifted one injured recruit, dragging him to cover, then returned for another. The alien recruits who had once laughed at him were now silent. They watched in disbelief as the human carried out actions that seemed impossible for his size. His courage was infectious. Where he went, others followed. Where he acted, hope sparked. The battle raged for hours. Elias moved relentlessly, never allowing exhaustion to slow him. He coordinated counterattacks, repositioned injured soldiers, and helped destroy raider drones using improvised traps. Every small success shifted the tide, turning panic into order. Slowly, the Alliance soldiers began to push the marauders back. The reptilians used their brute strength more effectively, inspired by Elias's guidance. The insectoids became faster and more precise, copying his movements. The crystalline beings learned to use their reflective bodies to blind drones temporarily, following his example. By the end of the day, the raiders retreated. Their ships lifted off, leaving scorched earth and destroyed equipment behind. The camp was battered but alive. The soldiers, covered in dust and blood, turned toward the center where Elias stood, breathing heavily but upright. His uniform was torn, his hands cut and scraped, Yet his eyes held the same calm determination that had carried him through the survival trial. For a moment, silence filled the camp. The alien recruits who had once mocked him now stared in astonishment. The reptilians bowed their heads slightly, a rare gesture of respect. The insectoids clicked softly, acknowledging his bravery. Even the crystalline beings shimmered differently, a sign of recognition that the human had earned their admiration. Elias said nothing. He did not raise his voice or demand praise. He simply began checking on the wounded, offering words of comfort and help. That was enough. The other soldiers moved around him, silently learning from the way he worked, calmly, efficiently, with courage that did not depend on size or strength. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon of Helion 3, the instructors gathered the surviving recruits. The crystalline commander's gaze rested on Elias longer than the others. "You have shown something rare today," he said. "Strength is not only measured by muscle or size. Some carry it in their spirit, their mind, and their heart. This human has shown that courage can shape the outcome of battle itself." The other instructors nodded, murmuring agreement. The aliens who had once sneered at him now looked at Elias with a new understanding. He had done more than survive. He had led. He had turned fear into action, confusion into strategy, and doubt into courage. That night the barracks were quiet. The whispers of ridicule had vanished. Some recruits looked at Elias with awe, others with a quiet determination to emulate him. He sat alone, tending to minor wounds on his uniform, listening to the wind outside the thin walls. His mind was already moving forward. The raiders were gone for now, but the universe was full of challenges. The trials were not over. Elias closed his eyes for a moment and thought of Earth, of the people who had taught him to endure, to never give up, to act even when fear was present. He had carried that spirit across the stars, and it had carried him through a battle that had seemed impossible. For the first time, the human soldier, once ridiculed, realized something important. Courage was contagious. Where he had led with determination, others had followed. Where he had acted with clarity, strength had emerged from weakness. And in that realization, he understood that the journey was no longer about proving himself to the universe. It was about proving what humanity could bring to the stars. And as the moon's pale light washed over the battered camp, the whispers began to change. No longer laughter, no longer mockery, respect, hope. The understanding that one small human could, through courage alone, silence doubt and inspire an entire force. Elias lay back on his bunk, exhaustion pressing down, yet his heart was steady. The trials ahead would be harder, the challenges greater, but he had seen the first proof of human spirit in action, and he would not stop. The sun had just begun to rise over Helion 3, casting long shadows across the battered camp. The raid from the day before had left scorch marks on the ground and twisted metal scattered everywhere. The Alliance soldiers moved cautiously, repairing damaged barricades and tending to their wounded. Despite the previous day's victory, tension remained thick in the air. Everyone knew the raiders could return at any moment, and this time they would come stronger. Elias Ward walked among the recruits, quietly inspecting the barricades and supplies. His uniform was torn, his hands still cut and bruised from the previous day, but his posture was straight, steady, and calm. The other soldiers worked around him, some still hesitant, some still filled with doubt, but all of them now watched him with careful attention. The human who had been mocked was no longer just a soldier, he was becoming a guide. A sudden tremor ran through the ground, and the distant hum of engines reached their ears. The raiders were back. This time their ships descended faster, larger than before, bristling with weapons and reinforced armor. From the horizon, a fleet of attack drones surged forward, scattering the remaining obstacles in their path. The camp erupted into chaos once more. The alien recruits froze at first, unsure how to react. Some tried to organize, but confusion overtook them. Elias did not pause. He grabbed a fallen energy rifle and ran toward the front line. His movements were precise, every step measured, every breath steady. Where the others saw danger, he saw opportunity. He directed the closest soldiers to cover the injured, signaling with hand movements and clear commands. The reptilians hesitated, their pride still clashing with fear. One of the massive warriors turned to leave the battlefield entirely, but Elias called out sharply, "No, stand your ground. Protect the camp." His voice was firm but calm, cutting through panic like a knife. Slowly, the reptilian turned back, eyes narrowing in surprise at the human's fearlessness. The drones advanced rapidly, their energy beams scorching the earth around them. Elias dodged behind a barricade, pulling 2 wounded soldiers to safety. He glanced at the crystalline recruits, their reflective bodies catching the rising sunlight, and motioned them forward to a better defensive position. "We hold the line here." No one falls back. As the battle intensified, the raiders targeted the perimeter where the weakest soldiers were stationed. Elias spotted a young insectoid, trapped under debris with drones approaching. Without hesitation, he sprinted across the open ground, weaving between laser fire and falling rocks. The wind and heat from the explosions whipped around him, but he moved with focus. Reaching the trapped insectoid, he lifted the creature with surprising strength and carried it to cover behind a damaged vehicle. The others watched in awe. The human soldier, small and fragile in appearance, was moving with courage that surpassed any physical strength. Where he went, others followed. His calm determination inspired action, turning panic into coordination. The reptilians now advanced with precision. The insectoids struck with renewed speed, and the crystalline beings directed their light to blind the drones, all under his guidance. Suddenly, a massive raider mech emerged from the horizon, towering over the battlefield, its weapons powered up, ready to strike indiscriminately. The alien recruits faltered, unsure how to stop such a machine. Elias's mind raced. He could not defeat it head-on, not alone, but he could create an opening. He grabbed an explosive from the supply crates, setting a trap in the path he predicted the mech would take. He motioned to the reptilian beside him. "Cover me. Distract the mech." The reptilian hesitated, then roared and charged, slashing its claws toward the machine. Sparks flew and the mech's attention shifted. Elias ran, placing the explosive at the mech's feet, and retreated behind a barricade just as the device detonated. The explosion rocked the ground, damaging the mech and forcing it to retreat temporarily. The other recruits, inspired by his courage and quick thinking, began to fight with renewed energy. Where they had been fearful and disorganized before, now they moved as a team, following the human soldier's example. Elias directed the wounded to safer positions, assigned targets for attack drones, and encouraged those who wavered. He was everywhere at once, small but mighty, moving with a clarity that no one else possessed. Hours passed. The battle continued, each moment testing the endurance of every recruit. Elias did not stop. He ran, ducked, lifted, dragged, and coordinated. His body ached, his hands bled, but he did not allow himself to falter. The raiders were fierce, but the human's courage was fiercer. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The raiders grew disorganized, their drones falling to improvised traps and coordinated attacks. A group of young recruits had become trapped behind a collapsed barricade, surrounded by energy beams. Elias sprinted forward, his small frame slipping through the gaps in the debris. He shouted instructions, helping them move in unison, dodging fire as he guided them back to safety. For each life he saved, the morale of the Alliance soldiers strengthened. Fear was replaced by hope, confusion by action. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the raiders began to retreat. Their ships lifted off, leaving the battlefield littered with debris, sparks, and smoke. The surviving recruits, battered and exhausted, turned to see Elias standing at the center of the camp. His uniform was torn, his body covered in dust and cuts, but his posture was unbroken. He looked small compared to the towering alien soldiers, yet the weight of his courage seemed larger than anything else on Helion 3. The alien recruits who had once mocked him approached cautiously, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. The reptilians lowered their heads slightly in respect, the insectoids clicked softly, and the crystalline beings shimmered in a gesture that meant acknowledgement. The human who had been ridiculed, the one they had assumed would break first, had stood his ground when none others could. Elias moved quietly among them, helping the wounded, checking supplies, and giving directions. He did not seek recognition, but the respect was there, unspoken but undeniable. The soldiers, inspired by his example, began to clean, repair, and organize. They had learned something important. Courage was contagious, and it could turn the weakest among them into a leader. As the sun set over the battered camp, Elias finally allowed himself a moment of rest. He sat on a crate, catching his breath and surveying the scene. The wounded were safe, The camp was intact, and the alien recruits were no longer filled with doubt. They had seen the truth. Strength was not only measured by size or power, but by heart, mind, and courage. Later that evening, the instructors gathered the surviving recruits. The crystalline commander's gaze rested on Elias longer than the others. "You have shown that leadership does not depend on strength alone," he said. "The courage of a single individual can inspire unity, change outcomes, and turn despair into victory. This human has done what many of you could not." The other instructors nodded, murmuring agreement. The recruits, once filled with doubt and mockery, now looked at Elias with a mix of admiration and quiet determination. They had learned that courage could not be measured by appearance or size, and they would not forget the example he had set. That night, the barracks were silent. No laughter filled the air. The alien recruits who had once sneered at the human soldier now respected him. Some glanced at him thoughtfully. Others quietly committed themselves to following his example. Elias lay back on his bunk, exhausted, yet his mind was clear. The battles ahead would be harder, the universe more dangerous, but he had proven that the human spirit could stand unbroken against fear, doubt, and chaos. As the stars shone through the thin windows of the barracks, Elias thought of Earth, of the lessons learned there. Endurance, bravery, and hope even in the darkest hours. He had carried that spirit across the stars and shown it to beings who had doubted his kind. His journey was far from over, but one truth had been established. Humans could face overwhelming odds and emerge not only alive, but victorious. And in that quiet moment, Elias Ward realized something else. He was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every human, for every soldier who might one day face doubt and fear, and for the belief that courage, above all, could silence ridicule, fear, and even the most powerful enemies. The camp was quiet, but Elias's presence was felt everywhere. The small human soldier, once ridiculed, had become a beacon of hope. The morning after the battle dawned quietly over Helion 3. The sky was pale, streaked with the faint reds and golds of sunrise. The winds, which had been so harsh during the survival trial and the raider attacks, now felt softer, almost peaceful. The camp was still damaged, but it was alive. The soldiers moved carefully among the wreckage, cleaning, repairing, and tending to one another. Elias Ward walked through the camp, surveying the scene. His uniform was torn and covered with dust, his hands still marked by scratches and bruises, yet his eyes were steady, clear, and calm. Around him, the alien recruits who had once laughed at him now worked with quiet efficiency. Some still looked at him with awe, others with thoughtful respect. Elias had never sought their admiration, but it was clear now that it had been earned. The crystalline commander approached him, his voice resonating softly. "Captain Ward," he said, "your actions over the past days have changed the way we see humanity. Your courage, your endurance, and your leadership have saved many lives. Not only did you survive where others faltered, you inspired others to rise above fear." Elias nodded, keeping his expression modest. "I only did what was necessary," he said. "Every soldier did their part. We survived because we worked together." The commander's eyes studied him, and for a moment there was silence. Then he smiled faintly. "Perhaps that is the truest strength. The willingness to act, to guide, and to endure even when the odds are against you. Humanity has much to offer the galaxy, Captain Ward. Today we have seen it firsthand." Word of the human soldier's courage began to spread quickly. Within the camp, alien soldiers who had doubted humans now spoke of him with quiet reverence. The reptilians, who had once jeered at his size, now shared stories of how he had carried their wounded through enemy fire. The insectoids, once sure he would fail, now clicked softly in acknowledgement of his bravery. Even the crystalline beings, tall and proud, shimmered with an unspoken respect. Elias spent the day helping organize supplies and checking on wounded recruits. He moved among them with patience and care, giving encouragement where it was needed, but never seeking praise. He knew that true courage did not require recognition. It only required action, and he had acted every day since he arrived on Helion 3. By afternoon, the instructors gathered the recruits for a final assessment. The previous trials had been brutal, pushing them to their limits physically, mentally, and emotionally. The alien instructors had expected the strongest to lead, but it was the human who had shown the greatest skill in uniting a fractured group under impossible conditions. The crystalline commander addressed the gathered recruits. Today we witness something remarkable. Courage is not measured by size, strength, or natural ability. It is measured by heart, mind, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. Captain Elias Ward has exemplified this courage. His actions have saved lives, inspired soldiers, and demonstrated the unique strength humanity brings to the galaxy. The recruits, once filled with doubt and mockery, stood in silence. Some bowed slightly, others clicked softly, and the reptilians lowered their heads, a rare gesture of respect. The human soldier, small and unassuming in appearance, had earned the admiration of every species present. Elias stepped forward, not to receive praise but to speak. "We all have courage inside us," he said. "It does not matter where you come from or how strong you are naturally. What matters is what you do when fear is in front of you. We survived together because we acted together. That is what makes a soldier. Not size, not claws, not armor, but courage and determination." The words resonated deeply with the alien soldiers. Some nodded slowly, others exchanged thoughtful glances. They had witnessed the truth. Humans were small in appearance but could carry immense strength and spirit. Over the next several days, the camp began to recover. The soldiers worked together, repairing the damaged defenses and reinforcing the perimeter. Elias trained with the recruits not as a superior but as an example. He showed them how to adapt to unexpected circumstances, how to think quickly under pressure, and how courage could inspire action. Every lesson was simple, practical, and rooted in human experience, yet it had profound effects. One afternoon, as Elias walked through the camp, he encountered a young reptilian recruit struggling to lift a heavy crate. Without hesitation, Elias stepped forward, offering advice and adjusting the crate so it could be moved more efficiently. The young reptilian looked at him with surprise. You could have done it yourself," he said. Elias shook his head. "Strength is not just in one person," he said. "It grows when we help each other. That is how we survive and succeed." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. The young reptilian nodded and, with renewed determination, completed the task. Around the camp, similar moments occurred. Small actions inspired by the human soldier that made a difference in their daily work. By the time the sun set on Helion 3, the atmosphere in the camp had transformed. Where there had once been doubt and ridicule, there was now respect and quiet admiration. Alien soldiers who had mocked humanity now spoke openly about the courage and skill of the human soldier who had faced impossible odds and led them through fire and chaos. The instructors called a final assembly at dusk. The barren plain was quiet except for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional gust of wind. Elias stood at the center, surrounded by alien soldiers who had once doubted him. The crystalline commander spoke once more. "Captain Ward, today you have proven that humanity is a species capable of remarkable courage, ingenuity, and leadership. Your example will be remembered across the Alliance. You have not only survived, you have inspired." Elias nodded, humbled but steady. "I am grateful for the opportunity to serve," he said. "But remember, courage is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who chooses to act in the face of fear. Every soldier here has that potential. Do not forget it." The alien recruits looked at him in silence, the weight of his words settling into their hearts. Respect, admiration, and understanding had replaced laughter and doubt. Humanity, once underestimated, had shown its true strength, the ability to face impossible odds with courage, to inspire others, and to act decisively when the moment demanded it. As night fell over Helion 3, Elias stood on a small rise overlooking the camp. The stars shone brightly, each one a reminder of the vastness of space and the countless challenges that lay ahead. He thought of Earth, of the lessons he had learned there, and of the journey that had brought him across the stars to this barren moon. He knew the future would hold more trials, more enemies, and more moments of doubt. But he also knew this. Humans were capable of rising above, of standing strong, and of proving their worth even in the face of overwhelming odds. The soldiers around him, alien and human alike, now looked to the stars with a new understanding. They had seen what courage could do, how it could unite, inspire, and protect. And they had learned to see humanity not as fragile but as resilient, resourceful, and brave. Elias took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air on his face. He had begun this journey as a single human among countless aliens mocked and doubted. Now he stood as a symbol of the human spirit, proof that courage and determination could rise above ridicule and fear. He knew the universe was vast and dangerous, but he also knew that humanity had a place in it, a place earned not by strength alone, but by heart, mind, and courage. As he looked out over the camp, the lights of the repaired defenses glinting softly under the starlight, Elias Ward allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The journey was far from over, but one truth was clear. Humans had proven themselves, and their courage would never again be underestimated. Across the galaxy, the story of the human soldier who faced impossible odds and inspired entire species would be told. And in that story, humanity would shine, not for its size or strength, but for its unbreakable spirit. And in that moment, Elias realized that true courage never needed an audience. It only needed a heart willing to act, a mind willing to think, and a soul unwilling to give up. He had lived it, and in doing so, he had changed the way the galaxy would see humanity forever.